Hello everyone, my name is Brisa Marie and welcome to my channel where we talk about everything grad life, grad advice, and research. In today's video, I'm going to explore why is graduate school hard? And I'm not going to just focus on the academic parts that are difficult, though I will mention them. Instead, I'm really going to focus on the parts of grad school that I think really genuinely make it much harder than undergrad. So if you're trying to figure out if grad school is for you or if you can do it, or just really curious on what are the hardest parts about grad school, then keep watching. In a previous video, I discussed what is the major academic differences between undergrad and grad school. But today I still really want to unpack what about the academics of grad school is difficult. So first, the workload increases, and by a lot. And I mentioned this a little bit in the previous video, but if you're somebody who completely is unaware of what the expectations are for graduate school, you oftentimes are asked to read a book a week, to write anywhere from 12 to 30 something page papers as like assignments. And then on top of that, think about your own research questions and topics, do applications to funding or to fellowships or other programs that might help you be successful, while also holding jobs like being a teaching assistant or a graduate student researcher or even a waitress at a restaurant. And all of these things put on top of each other really does make balancing and managing the time that you have in grad school a delicate act and can be quite difficult, especially if you don't know how to do it or have never had to do it before. However, even though this is the reality, there are strategies to address the workload increase. So for one, I think it's really important that you pick and choose. And I know that might sound a little bit weird because in undergrad, you're expected to do all of the readings and work that you're assigned in your syllabus. But in graduate school, the way I kind of approach what I'm doing is really focusing on the things that I think would be best for my research project. And because my ultimate goal is not just to make A's in classes, but to actually write a dissertation, I'm really curating what I'm engaging with to fulfill my own personal academic needs. And so I only read books, I only read articles from beginning to end if they seem super relevant or could impact my research in a positive way. For everything that is not relevant or that I don't care about, I read a book review, or I read the introduction, a short portion of the middle, and all of the conclusion. And that way you can get the major arguments. So when you're going into class, you can have some point of conversation, but you didn't have to spend an hour or two reading an article that you literally did not care about. Another thing you could do, which is not as common in my department, but I've seen work in other places, is by creating a working group where you all read different portions of the reading, or each of you read a different reading, and then you meet before class to talk about the major themes, and then you go into the class with the professor and have a larger dialogue based off of what your previous meeting. Now this requires a little bit more of camaraderie and team unification, and probably would be more possible in a social science-based program where you have to do specific canonical readings or like main discipline readings, but it is something that I would definitely encourage you try to implement. And in this way, you're working as a team to get all the readings done without overexerting yourself. And it's a good way to also build relationships with your cohort or your classmates. And then if things come worse to worse, I would totally suggest going on YouTube. Now, YouTube is not going to have the answers to all of your readings, especially if you're engaging with some obscure theorist from like the 1700s, middle of nowhere town, talking about something that nobody cares about. Like, I know you're not gonna find every theorist, but major theorists like Foucault, Bourdieu, César, Fanon, they're gonna be on YouTube. And at least somebody somewhere is going to discuss it or have some type of conference that discusses it. But you can also find blog posts or just random Google searches, even quick notes that could exist on Google to help you get a grasp of the argument. If you're not interested in these readings for your dissertation or for your research topic, but you need to talk about it in class, your main goal is just to make sure you understand what they're arguing and that you can talk about it a little bit. So it's not that you have it memorized or you have complete command over it. but really that you can talk about it. Another thing that makes graduate school difficult is that it's not necessarily evaluating how much you understand something, but rather it's evaluating what skills are you developing to do research. And so when you're getting graded, you're not getting necessarily graded on how well you understand a theorist or a concept, but rather how well you explain or analyze these theorists or these concepts or your own ideas. And so that can be really difficult because, well, writing is really subjective. You'll have a professor that'll want it to be a very specific way with a very specific goal and very specific language. And if you're somebody who's never written that way or has never even read anything written that way, it can be difficult to develop that skill to produce the type of product that that professor wants, and that can impact your grade. Especially if you have a really strict professor and then you have another professor that's really, really lax and just wants you to explore your ideas and free write and just make sure there's no typos. So it can be kind of hard to gauge what are you supposed to do to be successful. And one of the things that I think can help mitigate this problem is by really trying to get to know your professors before, during, and after your class. And I know in undergrad, people are always like, go to your office hours, get to know your professors, and you hear that all the time. But I am really saying in graduate school, it is so important to use your professor's office hours and get to know them and really have a relationship with them. Because one, it's really easy for them to kind of give you like benefit of the doubt if you're going to their office hours and getting to know them, or if you're really going off the marker and they can see that, they might give you some opportunities to fix it or some extra guidance to fix it because they know you personally and they want you to succeed because they know you and they're invested in you. Another resource that you can use specifically if you're thinking about writing is going to on-campus resources. Obviously, if you're a first year or a second year or just joining graduate school, you literally could have never experienced it before unless you're getting your second PhD. And so it is expected for you not to know what's going on and not know what to do, even if professors are speaking to you like what they're expecting is common knowledge. And as a result, the university often has like graduate writing centers, working groups. The Career Center might have some resources to help you get feedback or learn about writing skills or academic writing workshops that could happen on campus. And I definitely think, specifically dealing with your writing, you should take advantage of these resources as soon as you get on campus. And that'll help mitigate any of the extra stress or doubts that you might have. So one of the most impactful non-academic sides of graduate school that makes it so hard is actually the student and professor dynamic, or student and mentor dynamic that you'll have. Something that you may not notice as an undergrad is that ego is a big part of academia, and professors can be very protective of their academic reputation and their professional position. So it is completely possible to experience academic hazing, and this can be professors gaslighting you and telling you one thing, then when you do it, they're telling you it's all wrong and you need to do it another way. It can be professors being standoffish and not supporting you, but talking to you like you're supposed to do things right the first time, even though they're not guiding you. It can also be them encouraging you to basically replicate what their research is because it's most convenient for them, even though it's not what you want to do exactly. It can also include even the most extremes, like dealing with racism, dealing with overt sexism, them stealing your credit and publishing without giving you credit, and a lot of manipulation. And this can be exploitive work practices to getting you to do research for them, and like I said, not giving you credit when they publish. So these are really toxic things that happen in academia that nobody really talks about until you're in the thick of it. And it can really impact how you view yourself, how you view your project, and your graduate experience. And I think a way to approach this is by one, having a really open communication system with your professor, your mentor, but also the chair and or if possible, the dean of your department. And this way, when things start hitting the fan, you have a support system that can be there and a chain of command that you're not intimidated to go by. Now, if all of those people aren't treating you so great, which has been my experience, though I wouldn't say I know the dean. I don't have the best relationship with all the people in my department, so it's often difficult for me to know who can I trust, who has my best interests at stake. But if you're somebody who can establish a relationship early, it can help you mitigate these problems. what has been most helpful for me is that I have relationships with professors, with chairs, with advisors outside of my department. Since I don't feel very supported by my department all the time, I depend on support from other academic departments, and they help me navigate conversations or be aware of what's going on within the academic field or resources and things like that. So then I only really have to go inside of my department in most extreme or really specific reasons. And those situations are actually really easy to navigate because I know what the expectation is, I know what I want to get out of it, and they can actually help me directly because it's specific to my department or to my degree. And then in the least extreme, it can just be really awkward. You may not feel comfortable talking to your professor, or they may not feel comfortable talking to you. There might be a literal 60-year difference between you and your professor, and that's completely fine. And I think it's just really trying to develop what communication styles work best for you, what communication styles works best for them, and what the end goal is. What I think is most important about this reality though, and can help you deal with any type of negative professor-student relationship, is to acknowledge that you're not alone, and that this actually happens all the time and people just don't feel comfortable talking about it. But I'm talking about it because you need to know so you're not blindsided by it. And then I think other useful things to do, and actually a big part of grad school just generally, is talking to people. So make sure you just have really good relationships with people who are further along in your degree plan that you can reach out to and ask for advice or experience, and reaching out to the specific other advisees that that professor has, because you're literally not alone. You can't be their only advisee that's ever existed. And so reaching out to them and asking what their relationship or their experience has been and how they've dealt with this type of attitude, or if they had dealt with that type of attitude. So again, you can understand what strategies work best for that professor. And if possible, always have an open dialogue with your faculty and let them know how you feel, and keep it professional, but also be really honest and try to create the best situation where you all are completely aware of what's happening. And if that doesn't work out and it just seems like this is going to be horrible and it's going to affect who you are in your research, then I think some of the best advice is to always remember they don't have to be your advisor. You can always pick a different advisor, and it's not like you're married. So remembering that even though it feels like you might be strongholded in here, or they don't want to let you go, or it might be not okay, at the end of the day, what's most important is you and your research. So the other academic parts of grad school that are difficult is just knowing what to do and when to do it. And when you ask for help, you may not actually get really helpful answers. And that's partly why I've created this channel, is to help people get through these processes and understand what would be best for them or what their options are. And the best way to approach this sort of learning gap, besides subscribing to this channel, is using the career and academic services on campus and trying to talk to people in your program that are older than you. So if you know people who are generally successful, or you feel like they're going in the path that you would want to go, I would definitely suggest reaching out to them, asking them out for coffee or lunch, emailing back and forth, getting to know their process or what their advice is, and really just talking to people. And especially if you're first year and you don't know anybody, that can be really intimidating. But the more people you know, the more likely you're going to be able to succeed. And this ultimately can even help you with other things like grants, opportunities in the department, job opportunities. And I vividly remember my first year, because I was having such difficulties getting funded, I met with a different professor in my department every Friday for almost 15 weeks. And so there are ways to approach these gaps. They might require a little bit of work or some innovation, but you definitely can figure it out. And the main goal is just to talk to as many people as possible. So also going to resource centers and talking to the counselors there, to the people who work at the front office, to PhDs in jobs that you care about, to even people in different schools when you go to conferences. But just having an open network and a support system where you can ask questions is really important. And I address the professor and student relationship first because it's kind of like a domino effect. If that relationship is really bad, then it can impact how you view yourself. That's the next non-academic reality that makes graduate school really difficult, is that you're fighting yourself and self-doubt a lot of times. For many people, especially first generation, low income students of color, you're gonna maybe experience sensations of imposter syndrome, self-doubt, not feeling smart enough, feeling behind, feeling like everybody is smarter than you. And the reality is none of that is true, even if if it feels very true, and that a lot of people in grad school have no idea what they're doing. But if your relationship with your professor isn't good, that can compound those feelings that are already natural or already a part of your graduate experience by just being new to the space. And a part of imposter syndrome, or just feeling uncomfortable with being in a new place, is that you might overcomplicate things and feel like what you're doing isn't enough or isn't the right way, and think things too hard, or say, oh, because this is grad school, it has to be done in this particular way, versus being real with yourself, calming down, and really trying to understand what is it that you're trying to achieve, and not making things more work than what they need to do. Grad school, oftentimes when people talk about it, make it seem like, oh, it's this dreadful place that is so hard, and if you're not tired, you're not working hard enough. But that's a myth. My first year in grad school was great. I was always happy. I was pumped. Even though I wasn't funded, it was still a very positive experience because I was focusing on research that was completely relevant to me. I had a wonderful mentor that was in another department that was taking me under her wing and supporting my research and supporting me as a person more generally. And the jobs that I had were really pleasurable. This was not the case my second year, when I had, exploited faculty taking advantage of me, where I felt really exhausted, where my funding started to dwindle even more despite all of my work. And I was trying to do things a very particular way to prove myself, versus saying, I don't actually have to prove myself to these people. And really what's important is that I make progress on my research. The reality is your only real goal is to graduate. And so you need to do what is best for you to graduate in one piece, and not prove to people that you are just as smart, or you're smart enough, or you're an academic, or whatever you think you have to prove. You don't actually owe anybody anything. And then something else that happens when you're finding yourself, or you are experiencing self-doubt, is that you don't accept your roses. You might do a really amazing conference paper, or win a small grant, or get invited to do a guest lecture, and because you know the professor who asked you to do a guest lecture, or because that conference only had 400 people instead of thousands of people, or whatever, you tell yourself that it's not that big of a deal. But let me tell you, it's all a big deal. And when you put it on your CV, when you put it on your history, when you think about the experiences that you're gaining from doing these small things or not big deal things, they actually fundamentally help prepare you to do big things, but also to be an academic. And it doesn't matter how many people are in the room, or how many people are, pushing for those positions, or who you know. The reality is, when you accomplish anything, it is worth celebrating, and you deserve that celebration. So make sure you're taking your roses and writing down the things that are good and positive that you are doing, that are showing that you are progressing as a scholar. So when you're feeling like you're doubting yourself, you have something to reflect on. And at the end of the day, it's important to remember, even if it took you years to get into grad school, even if you experienced a lot of rejection before getting that one yes, is that you belong in grad school because you got there. And then I always say this all the time, but it's so important to make sure you prioritize yourself. Prioritize your needs and the things that will make you most healthy. But all of this can be really hard to navigate if you're not prepared or know what to expect. So if you're interested in exploring more grad life, learning more grad advice, and everything research, then subscribe. And if you found at least 2 things useful in this video, please hit the thumbs up so people know that this is a good video. And if there's any questions that I didn't answer, or if you have advice that you think could help people deal with what makes graduate school hard, please leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.